Thank you very much. They put me on first, partly because I live in Bristol still, so it was easy to get here, and partly for those of you who are still hungover from last night, because this talk is going to be largely around alcohol. So I'm going to ask you a question about this very unfortunate, very talented young woman who died just a few years ago, Amy Winehouse. And the question is this: did she die of a drug overdose? Did she die of an alcohol overdose? Or did she die of both? Now, Ted told me I'm not allowed to ask questions of the audience, so I'll make it easier for you because, of course, all three are correct. All three answers are right. And it's because it's a false question. Alcohol is a drug, and she died of alcohol. She didn't take any other drugs at the time of her death. And you can see this enormous public outpouring of grief because she was an extraordinarily talented singer and also a very appealing person in the way she struggled with her demons as well as with her talent. And she died, sadly, in the situation in which we are now told to call recovery. So she met the criteria for being a recovered drug user or drug or alcoholic. And that was one of the reasons she died, because her vulnerability to the drug of her choice, which in this case was alcohol, disappeared as a result. The tolerance disappeared, so her vulnerability increased as a result of her abstinence, which wasn't very long, it was only a few weeks. But this idea that you can recover and suddenly be immune from the risks of drug use or alcohol use is a real challenge to us at present. It's to some extent a fallacy which is being perpetuated by a government that wants us to pretend that the problems of drug addiction and alcoholism don't exist or can be easily surmounted simply by stopping using. Because when she relapsed to use, she died with a blood alcohol level which would not normally have killed someone. But I want to tell you more than this today, because that's a sad event, but it's an event that I think has missed an opportunity, because I would have seen this as a real chance for society to say something about the dangers of alcohol. Why do we not have a public campaign to reduce the dangers of alcohol based on Amy's death? And what's strange about her death is that we can contrast it with this image here. Now, some of you, how many of you have seen this image? I'm going to ask you a question. So a lot of you have seen this image of Leah Betts, and this is an image on a billboard, and there were many of these images around the country when Leah Betts died. And she died in 1995. She died having taken a couple of ecstasy tablets, and then misunderstood the health advice at the time. And she drank a lot of water thinking that ecstasy caused dehydration, which of course it can do if you're dancing a lot, but she wasn't. She was just organizing a house for her 18th birthday party. And she drank about 7 liters of water, and that led to her death. She died of water poisoning. If she hadn't drunk that much water, she wouldn't have died. And we now have changed our health messages. But what's interesting about her death is that it was put out on billboards all over the country like this. And the reason for that is, I think, a very cynical one. Because at that time, the drinks industry were very worried that young people like Leah would stop drinking and would use recreational drugs. So they started a systematic campaign to try to scare people away from using new drugs and stick with the old tried and trusted drug, alcohol. And we see, if we look at the harms from drugs and the number of people who die from drugs, that in fact the legal drugs like tobacco and alcohol are far and away the biggest killers in this country. Over 80,000 people a year die from tobacco-related diseases, and about 8,000 die of alcohol-related diseases. And if you look to the other side of the graph, you can see that about 1,000 die from opiates, 200 from paracetamol, about 180 from cocaine, and almost no one dies from drugs like amphetamine, cannabis, or ecstasy. But there's this huge campaign against the so-called recreational drugs, which I think distracts us, maybe deliberately, from thinking about the harms of alcohol. And alcohol is a particularly problematic drug for young people. In fact, this is truly one of the most terrifying statistics. When I started in medicine in 1975, I was not in any sense expecting that towards the end of my career, 30 years on, that alcohol would have become the biggest killer of men in this country as it is today. So it is the most common cause of death in men between the ages of 16 and 54. And I see quite a few men in that category, age category in the audience. So be aware, alcohol is a toxic drug. It's so toxic that if it was to be sold today as a medicine or even as a foodstuff, it would fail on all the safety criteria. But it's widely used and very dangerous. And there is an epidemic of deaths as a result of the very early use of alcohol in our society and excessive binge drinking. Over the years, I've tried systematically to tease apart the harms of drugs using a rational approach, looking at all the different harms. And this graph you may have seen, it's become quite well known now. It's used in schools, in sixth forms to educate people about drugs. And what it shows you are the estimates of harm of different drugs using a 16-point scale. The blue bars represent the scale of the harm to the user, and the red bars the scale of the harm to society. And you can see alcohol is not the most harmful drug to the user. Drugs like heroin, crack cocaine, crystal meth are more dangerous to the user. But overall, to society, alcohol is far and away the most dangerous drug. And that's because it's so widely used, and people are either ignorant or actively repress the knowledge of its harms. So I have argued for a long time that if we are serious about reducing the harms to people in this country from drug use, the real target should be alcohol. And as I was on the radio this morning pointing out, there are rational approaches we could take. There are ways we could use science to reduce the harms of alcohol, just as we're using science now to reduce the harms of tobacco. And I'm fairly confident that over the next decade, by switching from cigarettes, burning tobacco in cigarettes, to electronic delivery systems, we will massively reduce the harms of tobacco. And I would like to do the same for alcohol, given the scale of the problem. One thing I can say from that analysis is that if you plot out the harms of drugs against their status in the Misuse of Drugs Act in this country, you see there is no relationship. A linear correlation of 0.04 is effectively no correlation. So the law is unjust because it's based on an incorrect analysis of the harms of drugs. And that means a lot of people, up to 1 million young people in this country with convictions for cannabis possession, are being criminalized because we have an inaccurate and unjust law. And I actually believe that part of the reason we continue to pursue this policy is because it deflects attention away from the harms of alcohol. I think the policy is actually driven by maybe not a deliberate, but certainly a subconscious desire for us not to do anything about alcohol. So we choose these other drugs like cannabis and legal highs. The government focuses its attention, the media focuses its attention on those because it doesn't want people like me to highlight and spotlight the dangers of alcohol. Now, of course, challenging public opinion, political opinion like this, is not without its risks, as you can see on the next slide. And there you have it. There you have the what happens if you challenge the government and point out that their drug policy is not only dishonest, but also unjust. And I guess I'm going to leave you with the thought, was that a failure? And I don't know. Maybe it certainly was in terms of my status in government, but in terms of getting to communicate with an audience like you, I don't know. Maybe somehow it was a success. Thank you very much.